Okay, so Stephen is not online. I think it's quite late at night in Australia at the moment. So we will have a panel discussion. I know we started this session a little bit late and we are rolling on, but I think it would be good to give the speakers an opportunity and you an opportunity to ask them questions. So I will ask Jochen and Pam to come up to the stage and take a seat. And Stephen isn't here, but there are people in the audience with experience in the Antarctic Treaty System. And I've been involved in some of the work Stephen's talking about. So don't be afraid to go there as well. But okay, roving mics, Flo or someone, and questions. Yes, Reed.
Let the tomatoes come.
Thanks, Tim. This is for both of you, but really mostly for Sue. You know, Jim Hansen was sort of the first, or at least iconically, a scientist who stepped into the realm of advocacy, and he was, of course, much criticized for it, and we all recognize that we really need to go beyond working in our lab if we're going to be making a difference. And we talk about policy makers, but really it's politicians who are the ones who allow policy to be put forward, even if they're, so they're listening to people who are making suggestions to them. One of the things, and some of us in this room have personally reached out to our local politicians or regional or national, and that's a good thing when we can get their ear. Something that's kind of shocking is that there are now more than 100,000 people every year, tourists, going to Antarctica. And these are largely wealthy people. Some of them are quite influential people. And a number of us in this room have given lectures on some of these tourist cruises. And I personally have found the audiences incredibly receptive. And some of these people are very successful, and some of these people are very influential. And we know that politicians listen, especially in the US system, the way politics in the US is, they listen to their donors much more than they listen to scientists. And so I'm trying to find, and hopefully others are as well, the best way to craft the way to allow these people who do have the ear of the politicians more so than the policy crafters, how we can make them become advocates and partners with us as scientists. And I've personally done that a couple of different ways, and I wonder if others have as well, and any advice that you can give would be really helpful. Yeah, yes, that was the question. It was a long question, but
do you want some advice on that?
Yes.
I mean, I would simply do it. I mean, one of the things that we do, for example, is we bring scientists together with negotiators who, as you rightly point out, they can only move as fast as their political masters want to. But what we've been doing through that is crafting better messages for the people they serve, for the ministers they serve. And that's why we hope that something like AMI, at least over time, will be much more effective, because that's literally bringing scientists, or at least a scientist, together to talk directly to these ministers, even if it's just for a few minutes. And I would say also for the movers and shakers, and I've got a very schizophrenic attitude toward things like, say, the WEF. These folks that come together and talk to each other and are very successful, but will they really do anything? I would say we need to ask them to do something. In other words, not just transmit the message, but say, talk to the people. Maybe that will help.
I mean, I fully agree. Maybe just one sentence on my experience. I think generally, or many of the policy crafters are on our side. I mean, it's the people that are much easier to connect to than the policy makers. So yeah, and many of us are moving between those different streams. If you think about my presentation and sort of this policy entrepreneurial picture, I think this is what we have to do. We just have to go for it and try out stuff. We need people who act.
So I have the mic here, and I have I have two questions, if that's okay. The first question is about what scientists have to do more and more to try to get their voice out. You know, we're being asked to be scientists, educators, trainers, yada, 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 and now learn the way the policy-making world works. That's a lot, and I'm wondering if policymakers are also getting educated on how science works. Because we are delivering IPCC reports for them. That's us. So, and now they always want to deny it, change it, whatever. So that's on them. I want to say, what else do you want from us? And the second question, is. With respect to climate change, there's always this question: how much is it going to cost to do things? And giving the time frame, how is your timing relevant? How sure are you about this timing? And do they ever ask themselves, what is the cost of not doing anything? We just showed a picture of what it would look like in the Nile region of 1 meter of sea level rise. Alexandria, which is on the coast, it's 5.3 million people. The city would be gone with a meter of sea level rise. How much does it cost to not do anything? How long does it need? Does it need to move 5.3 million people from the coast somewhere else? So these are my questions to you guys. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good one for you.
I mean, actually, that may be a bit controversial what I'm going to say now, but I mean, again, I'm a social scientist, so I try to understand how policy works. That's not the same as advocating for policy change. Those are two different perspectives, and I like to do both, but now I'm going to speak as a social scientist who wants to understand how society works. So with regards to the sort of the second question, let me start with that. I think there is a lack of understanding of what coastal societies have been doing since centuries in terms of adapting to sea level rise. Alexandria is not going to be gone by 1 meter of sea level rise. And also those climate central maps, I need to say that because it's a sort of a dilemma that has been discussed for a long time. I'm working on adaptation and I try to help people to deal with climate change. That's a totally different perspective than the mitigation perspective, trying to motivate people to reduce emissions. From an adaptation perspective, I've been leading since 15 years an effort, the DAY4 model of simulating coastal impacts and adaptation. This was the model around for many years and has been picked up on all global reports on that stuff. And basically the big difference is adaptation. I mean, people adapt. Many cities in Asia have had subsidence of up to 5 meters and have adapted to that. So we have places on Earth that have experienced 5 meters of sea level rise, such as parts of Tokyo, for example, but also Shanghai, Jakarta, and many places, all river deltas, or big cities in river deltas, and have adapted to that. I mean, the Po Delta, where we are, I mean, we've heard about that, has sunk by 1.5 meters. The northern part of Germany has sunk by 1.5 to 2.5 meters, etc. All of those places, we've got millions of people living below sea level rise, and that's going to happen. We are already seeing that. And another message is, it's actually relatively cheap to adapt to low rises of sea level rise from an economic perspective, because for densely populated areas, not for the rural areas. Because densely populated areas, there's a lot of money, no? There's a lot of capital. Imagine those big cities we have in the world, those high-rise buildings, just putting a dike of 10 meters in front of those cities, that's peanuts against the massive capital that is stored in those high-rise buildings. So we've done cost-benefit analysis on those things, and I mean, generally you can say 10% of the coast hosts 90% of the people in the floodplain, and those you can easily protect against 1 and up to 2 meters of sea level rise. That's a message. The rule, and that's in the IPCC report. I'm a working group 2 person, so I'm writing on adaptation. So rural areas and many small islands, it will be very different from that. I mean, there is no money to protect, and we have to consider to move, etc., on the long run. But the big picture needs to consider the economic side, the social side, the practice of people we are doing, and I'm missing the awareness of that in the sea level rise community. Also, this first question in terms of how it's again a question of how the policy process works. I mean, it works. I mean, the currency is interests. It's not about knowledge. That's the currency of science. And so there are many people who have an interest in continuing to live how we're living. There are powerful elites that can find their way into policy. Our world is a world of advocacy and powerful, resource-rich advocacy groups making policy work or influencing policy, and that's something we have to recognize. It's not I don't like the word lack of political will. I mean, it's much worse than that. I don't know what political will is in any case, but politicians have constituents, have people who are voting them, and that's how the system works, and we're proud of that. That's democracy, no? So, and there are interests in there, and policymakers have to some extent have to follow those interests. I'm not saying that I like that. I would love to be, or I'm also an advocate, but I'm just not speaking from an advocacy perspective, because I think that's more informative what I have to say from a social science perspective to this audience.
Yes. Sorry, sir, very quick announcement, sorry, but in 15 minutes there is the ISMIP workshop starting in room B. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, just very briefly, I mean, I think that there's plenty out there that shows that mitigation is cheaper than adaptation, number one. Number two, what we're talking about in terms of sea level rise from Antarctica is beyond those limits, those 1 to 2 meters of adaptation. But it is important, by the way, like the 1 meter map of Alexandria, the core of Alexandria is more of an island or a peninsula. It's not gone, but by 3 meters, pretty much gone. And I would say from my experience that policymakers actually don't have the knowledge, because every single time we do one of these meetings with scientists, especially when it's behind closed doors, they don't know this stuff. They just don't. And so it really is new to them. So I would say, you know, we're not asking you to do more, we're maybe asking you to do differently, maybe, in terms of messaging.
Sorry, who's?
Okay, I'm next. So here's a question from a recovering MIP lead, okay? So my question to you is, what you showed was really amazing, this study and this high sea level, and I think, you know, this is fantastic. But my question is that it comes from one model, both, even the Parketal comes from the same model as the other model, right? So then, as a recovering lead of, you know, trying to kind of say multiple model may have, you know, and multiple models tend to get smaller number than this one single model that basically you all cited, right? So therefore, as for myself as a reflection, I come upon I don't want to come across being a climate denier, because I do believe in climate change and I do believe we're going to have high sea level. However, the studies that you're propagating, and you're saying we're going to be climate alarmist, actually I consider to be really, really off the chart. And so then how do I then start the stage saying, well, you know, there is those one model that kind of gives high level of sea level that comes used by a few groups, but then there's a whole community and a whole room that may not agree with it. So then how do we reflect and how do we bring, because like on the one hand, you're saying that they shouldn't be afraid of being a climate alarmist. And on the other hand, when I kind of saying, well, actually, if you look at multiple lines of evidence from different things, the story could be quite different. And therefore, I'm kind of cast upon as a climate denier, possibly. So how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, and that's one of the reasons why I was nervous coming up. My understanding actually is that these are different models, but what they are is that, yeah, but they're based on the same sorts of assumptions, okay, that at least to my mind as a policymaker are capturing both the past of Antarctica, deep past, the recent past, and also taking into account things like what we've already seen on Greenland and the peninsula in terms of predicting the way ice is going to behave. So from my point of view, so I'm just being very blunt about my point of view, it seems to me that those models capture reality better. The multi-model community does not think that, but I think we do, to some degree, at least need to look at what the models are saying. And for example, one of the presentations yesterday showed models being used that were saying that the Antarctic Peninsula was going to gain mass. Now, to my point of view, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe we'll start seeing that someday, right? But we're not seeing the Antarctic Peninsula, to my knowledge, gaining mass at this point of time. East Antarctica is a lot more difficult, of course, but just sort of calibrating it in that way. And I would say maybe one way to approach it is just to talk about both things without, you know, having to be making judgments, but saying, I mean, the point being, okay, to think about when you're putting this forward, not that you're a climate denier, but are you willing to discount that worst case scenario and say that sea level's going to go down and so we can go up to 2 or 3 degrees. That's the bottom line message you might be putting forward. That's not climate denialism, though. It's different.
Yeah, we don't want to get into a Mickey versus ISMIP debate, but your point's really well taken, Sophie. Yeah. But many people in this room have their own views as scientists, and we're also asking them to be communicators as well. And so you will get a range of views, Pam, and that just reflects the nature of where the science is at.
That's the nature of science. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a microphone, so I just start talking. I wanted to start with saying thanks to Pam for making us not be afraid to be alarmist. As a paleoclimate person, I had my fair share of it. Thanks for making that very clear. And I want to build on the previous point, but not talk about the technicality. So there's, like in these conferences, right, we have all these debates, and you hear they're real. So there's a real importance of scientific dispute, but then there's a real need for clear messaging. And I think we saw before Valerie doing an amazing job, right? And she signed away many years of her life doing that for all of us. But IPCC reports only come out every 7-8 years because the volume to deal with is so large. So how can we bridge that gap? What can we do?
Hold that thought. I see people leaving the room. So I just want to say we're going to reconvene at 2:15.
Yeah.
And there'll be a photo at
2:10.
At 2:10.
Just here in
before we reconvene.
on the entrance here.
So for the following session, we're sliding again, just so those conveners know. Did you guys remember what Tina said? You can respond.
I mean, that's what we're trying to do with the State of the Cryosphere report, but I would love it if there were like dedicated Antarctica reports that could come out every couple of years to just sort of update where the community is right now. I don't know who could take, you know, power over that, if it would be SCAR or, you know, that takes funding, right? And it also takes more time.
I would also like to respond to that question and the question before, in the sense that we certainly need those annual reports. I think this is quite important. However, they need to have an authority similar to the IPCC, and I'm not sure whether that would be the case if it comes from one institution, for example.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The point is, and this goes to the question we had before, the point is we need an assessment. So we have different opinions in the scientific community, such as Pam advocating sort of the high-end numbers because she believes those are better or more correct, as you just have argued.
Or motivate action. That's the...
But on the other hand, we need at equal footing the other opinions of all the other researchers, and we need to assess what is agreed upon and what is not. And this is a very important role in order to balance decision-making. if I'm looking at adaptation decisions, I cannot be an advocate on alarmist because I need to help people to do the best thing they can do. So I cannot be alarmist, and in some cases, it makes sense to incorporate the high numbers in a decision, and in other cases, it does not.
Okay, I think we will wrap it up here, partly because we have slid in the agenda and people are hungry and they need lunch. But before you go, a big round of applause for our